Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Tirana Hassan. She is the acting executive director of Human Rights Watch, which is issuing its annual report this week, and she joins us from London. Thank you very much. Your report is obviously and sadly a grim report, but before we get into some of the issues you focused on, I want to have your view on a general question, the issue of democracy. It seems that it is under threat. We saw the recent events in Brazil with the storming of government buildings in Brasilia by sympathizers of the outgoing President Jair Bolsonaro, echoing to some degree what happened at the Capitol in Washington 2 years ago. We're seeing more authoritarian regime in places like Turkey, Tunisia, India. We're seeing coups in Western Africa. Are you concerned that democracy and human rights are really in a very difficult place this year?
I think that these attacks symbolize not only the dangerous fragility of the democratic institutions which are needed to support human rights, but it also shows the desperation of autocrats, despots, and the strongmen who are beginning to lose power, where the tides are turning and there have been global pushbacks on authoritarian leadership and on sort of an anti-human rights agenda. So whether it be Bolsonaro's Brazil or Trump's America, both of these leaders led with a very anti-rights kind of agenda, and both of these leaders really did try and erode democratic institutions. Bolsonaro, in particular, had been chipping away through his presidency, at the independence of the judiciary, constantly undermining them and therefore sowing seeds of doubt in the democratic systems within Brasilia to this point today. So these sort of acts of violence and these physical and even attacks in the media on key democratic institutions really are a sign of desperation. They aren't a sign that the despots and the autocrats are winning. And I think that it's really about what happens next and how we fortify democracy. And we saw the attacks in 2023, and we see the we saw the attacks in 22, and 23 is really the year to fortify, stand up. It's a call to action.
Right. Obviously, you've examined in your report the situation in Ukraine. One could argue that we're seeing the whole gamut of human rights violations. What's interesting, though, and what you're pointing out is that these crimes are being monitored, documented, investigated by the International Criminal Court, the UN system, even judiciaries in several countries, not only Ukraine, but several Western countries. What do you make of this? I mean, how do you view this? I mean, are you optimistic because you're seeing the reaction, or are you so shocked by what you and others have documented on the ground in Ukraine?
It's really the world's response to Ukraine that has shown us what is possible when governments actually come together and they fight back against the autocrats' grabs to power and widespread human rights violations. We have seen the international community essentially using every tool in their arsenal to ensure that there will be justice and accountability, to ensure that human rights violations are going to stop. We've seen extraordinary action from governments all over the world, from the International Criminal Court, to start evidence gathering measures to ensure that courts and legal proceedings are going to be well positioned to kick off as soon as they're able to. And we saw even the UN mechanism go into full flight. We have seen a mechanism be at the Human Rights Council has created a mechanism to collect evidence for future prosecutions. So it's a really encouraging precedent that has been set for the future that indeed we need to ensure is applied to other conflicts and crises all over the world.
Right. I want to turn now to another place where we've seen lots of violence, a different kind of violence, because it's not a war. It's Iran. We've seen a protest movement for several months now that's been met with fierce repression, including capital executions. What is your take on what's happening in Iran and what it means?
What's happening in Iran is really extraordinary. What started off as a protest movement on the death of Masa Amini, it was a protest that was led by women and girls. And a lot of people, I think, thought that this is a protest about the hijab laws and about women's rights. And it may have started out on that, but it has soon become a nationwide protest with Iranians from all walks of society, from all ages and all genders, taking to the street to tell the government, to tell the regime that enough is enough. They are tired of living in a society where their rights are completely disrespected. They are tired of living in a country where the authorities are completely mismanaging and making life essentially, very difficult for the average Iranian person. But we've seen that, what the Iranian authorities see now, or the message they should be receiving, is that the Iranian people will not stand for it anymore. Their demands are clear. Repression isn't a shortcut to stability. And this is what autocrats fear most. They fear that the people that they want to control are going to hold them accountable. So these protests are a first step, but it's really what the international community does. And it's after this and ensuring that the international community lends its political attention and its stamina. This is not a quick fix. This is long-term change that is required. And they need to have the stamina that the protests have to ensure that these demands become a reality.
Right. I want to turn to China. The UN Human Rights Council was not able to pass a resolution to discuss a report by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights describing the abuses in the Xinjiang region, saying that they could amount to crimes against humanity. We know there's a lot of pressure by China on the UN system, on many countries. Are you hoping that this could change because of other factors, because of the tensions between the US and China, and that human rights in China could be an important issue in 2023, or do you fear that this will be muzzled once again?
Well, firstly, I would start with saying human rights in China are a priority for 23. It's not an if. It's a definite. And it's because the gravity and scale of the crimes that have been committed by Xi's government against the Uyghurs in Xinjiang are just so egregious that they meet the level of crimes against humanity. That's what Human Rights Watch and the High Commissioner's Office have concluded. But we should remember that it was very disappointing in 2022 that the Human Rights Council resolution to merely sort of further discuss the report that was written by the UN failed, but it only failed by 2 votes. And that is quite extraordinary. And that was a very close vote. And if another resolution is put, it is now a real opportunity for the members of the Human Rights Council to actually vote differently, because the amount of evidence about the gravity of the crimes that are committed by Xi's government really are undeniable at this point. And I think that there should be a shift in how that vote is going to land. I think that, there are cracks in the autocratic armour of the Chinese government at this point in time. And the only way that we're going to make that crack even bigger is by ensuring that the international community starts to stand up. It's not one country standing up against such a big regime. It's actually going to take these new coalitions that we're talking about and that we're advocating for to stand up. In a way, there's safety in numbers.
Right. Just as a last question, obviously, you showed encouragement by watching the reaction of the international community to crimes in Ukraine. But obviously, this means that from Ethiopia to Afghanistan, and I could run a long list of countries where there are serious crimes being committed, they're essentially committed in the dark. Nobody's really monitoring, nobody's really highlighting them. Is this obviously a major concern for you?
It is. And I think Ethiopia is a good example. The implementation of the truce, look, it's a fragile truce. It's positive that it's there, but we all know from history that you don't get stability without accountability. And what's very important at this point in time is that we have accountability for the crimes that have been committed. The AU needs to be very vocal about condemning and preventing abuses. And we need to see the actual implementation, for example, of the monitoring mechanisms from the AU and also access to the UN into these areas in Tigray, for example. That's the only way that we're going to be able to keep a spotlight. The Ethiopian authorities have taken a page out of the autocrats handbook, and that is to keep the abuses happening in the dark. Don't let journalists in, don't let human rights organizations in, but it's up to us to keep the spotlight on. They can make it difficult, but we must keep the pressure on, and we must ensure that the rest of the international community doesn't sort of have a memory lapse about the severity of the crimes that took place in Ethiopia, because if they do and they don't ensure the delivering of accountability, we'll see history repeat itself.
Tirana Hassan, Acting Executive Director of Human Rights Watch, I want to thank you very much for appearing here on the France 24 interview, and thank you all for watching it.
Thank you for having me.